Welcome everyone. On behalf of the team at Wellington Real Estate, we'd like to thank you all for attending our information session this evening. Over the last 12 months, we've continued to work on our business and have invested in the future of our team, expanding in many areas and creating the ability to support you further. We are very excited about our future and our current market space, which is promoting local confidence and, most importantly, capital growth across your properties. We are very pleased with the efforts of our teams and look forward to the long relationships with our clients. Wellington, Shire and East Gippsland continue to hold very low vacancy rates, currently the lowest in the state based on the REIB March return of 0.2%. Inner Metro is sitting at 9%. The median house price locally is $350,000 and for rentals $360 a week, so we've also had an increase across that market space. Currently in sale at the moment, there is across the whole area 21 properties available for rent and 146 properties for sale. Our market space has improved incredibly, which you would have all seen in the local market, and we're very proud of that, and look, we hope you get a little bit out of tonight, and I'll hand you over to David and Shane who will present this, and help yourself to tea, coffee, and we'll chat to you at the end.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thank you for coming. My name is Shane Stone. Myself and my business partner, David Woolfall, are property managers on a day-to-day basis, and we also do property management training across Australia and specifically in Victoria. This is probably the 5th or 7th landlord night we've done in Victoria this year. Oh, sorry, I'm the handsome one on your left. David and I run a very, very low-key information night. We will deliver this information to you in layman's terms as easy as possible. There has been a lot of noise in the media, both social and mainstream media, about these amendments. Let me assure you, make yourself very clear that they're not that as bad as everybody seems to think. They are very straightforward. There's some wins for landlords and there's wins for tenants. But overall, it's not too bad and not as scary as it all is. David is, I would call, a specialist in this area, and he'll be presenting most of these amendments. I'll jump in and annoy him during his presentation if we need to kind of get down to layman's terms. We encourage questions. If you can just hang on to the end. David and I are up from Melbourne for the evening. We're going back, but we're more than happy to hang around and answer any questions. And if you need to contact us after this evening, you can get our details through Elise. I've known Elise now for a long time. I'm looking at her so we don't show her age, but Elise and I rolled out some rental training programs in excess of 15 years ago. So we're very good friends, and I can assure you your property's in very good hands because this young lady's quite amazing. David, I'll hand over to you. Thank you very much listening. Me and David will jump in between each other. Any questions, hang on to the end, and I'll hand you over to David.
Thank you, Shane, and thank you to the team at Wellington Real Estate for inviting us out here tonight to talk to you guys and let you know all about the Residential Tenancies Amendments. As Shane said, they're not as bad as what you may have heard through social media and even the mainstream media who's portraying them as being quite bad for landlords, but that's not the case. There's a lot of safety nets in there for some of the things that you might have heard, and we'll run through those tonight and hopefully be able to put your mind at ease about some of the things that you might have heard, which aren't, as we say, as bad as what they sound they might be. So first thing to let you know is that all of the Residential Tenancies Amendments came into effect on the 29th of March this year. There were 5 or 6 amendments that had come into play earlier. In most cases, they're nothing for you guys to be too concerned about. Probably the ones that landlords, or sorry, residential rental providers, as you now know, would be concerned about is the one about pets, but I'll run through that with you shortly as well. Just very quickly, if you've heard anything from the Residential Tenancies Act, there's 2 types of buildings. I'm only going to be talking about Class 1 buildings because in this area we probably don't have anything as a Class 2 building. And having had a quick chat with the team at Wellington, that they're not concerned about the Class 2 building issues. So probably one of the things that's been talked about most is the change in terminology. Tenants are going to be referred to as renters. You guys are now residential rental providers. And a tenancy agreement is a residential rental agreement. I'm going to say now, forgive me if I keep slipping back into landlord and tenants, because I've been doing this for 25 years roughly. So landlords and tenants is a bit of a habit for me. It's a bit hard to get used to the other sayings. Just want to let you know very quickly that some of the aspects of the Residential Tenancies Act do carry with them fines. Some of those fines for individuals can be up to around about $99,000. I don't say that to scare you, but I do say that so as you understand that it's important to take the advice of the people that are giving you advice, which is the team here at Wellington Real Estate. They know what they're doing really well, so if they're telling you that you need to be looking at doing something, take their advice. Their job is to protect you from getting one of those fines, and they will do that very well. So probably the first main amendment that came in that was something that people were concerned about was the ability for tenants or renters, sorry, I've got tenants up there. I should have had renters on the piece of paper on the slide. Their ability to have pets. It's not just a definite that they've got to have, that they're allowed to have pets. It is difficult, however, for the residential rental provider to stop pets being there. So if a tenant wants, or a renter wants to have a pet, they need to ask permission. They do that on a certain form, and as a landlord or residential rental provider, you can try and say no. If you want to say no to it, you take it through to VCAT, and they may make an order to exclude the pet, but you've got to prove that the pet's not suitable in the property. I think it's not a bad change, because what it does is it gives us a framework. Under the old laws, a tenant could get a pet and we wouldn't be able to do anything at all. Under these laws, there's a framework for us to work with, to seek compensation for stuff that the pet does, and there's a framework for us to have the pet removed from the property if there are any issues and concerns, which we didn't have before. There's a number of things that as a residential rental provider you need to disclose to a renter before they sign a rental agreement. And you'll probably find, and the team will have their own procedure for this, but they might ask you to fill out a form just confirming some of these issues. So you need to let the renter know if you've got a plan to sell the property, or if you've engaged an agent to sell the property, if a mortgagee is taking control of the property, if the residential rental provider doesn't own the property. So if you're a power of attorney or executor, they need proof that you're entitled to lease that property out. And the last one's probably of no relevance here, that talks about embedded electricity networks. They're more an inner city apartment issue. You need to also disclose if the building has been the subject of a homicide in the past 5 years, whether the premises meets the minimum standards, and I will run through the minimum standards for you shortly. Don't get too concerned about those minimum standards, a lot of them are common sense. You need to have gas and electricity and pool safety checks if you've got a pool, and on the disclosure you need to disclose when the most recent check was and any outstanding recommendations, whether the place is heritage listed, if the premises is subject to mould or damp that's not caused by the building structure, if it's been contaminated by drug use in the past 5 years, or if it's got asbestos found by suitably qualified inspection. You don't need to disclose if it's got asbestos if you just think it has, or if you've seen asbestos there but it hasn't been found on a suitably qualified inspection report. And if there's been a planning permit lodged that will affect the premises, that also needs to be disclosed. So they're things at the start of a tenancy that need to be disclosed to the renter. And as I said, the team at Wellington will probably have a system in place where they'll get you to fill out a form just disclosing any of that information.
Before you leave, David and I and Elise, we've made a cheat sheet for you, which is pretty much a summary of the slides David's got up, they're just down the back with a whole lot of other paraphernalia, so please make time to take them because we've really made this as basic as possible. But if anyone wants these slides, we're more than happy to distribute to them through Elise. So if you want to use a cheat sheet but you want to drill down on it more, contact Elise, we'll send the slides to you or to her, and then she can put them up as well. So yeah, I'll keep David. I won't interrupt David's presentation.
There's some restrictions now on what, as estate agents and landlords, we can ask a renter when they're making application for a property. I'm not going to run through all the restrictions. It's a little bit of information in relation that goes on the application. There are still ways for us to get around that and find out the information that we need to know. So don't be too stressed if you've heard that we can't ask a lot of information. We can still find, there's ways that we can still find it out. We just can't ask the renter certain things, but we can ask their references. So we've still got the way of finding out the things that we need to know. There's two types of prescribed residential rental agreements. There's agreements longer than 5 years. I would say none of you are probably ever going to put a tenant into a property on an agreement for longer than 5 years. So what we'll be concerned about is agreements that are less than 5 years. They're a standard format, but you can add additional terms so long as they're not prohibited terms. There is some liabilities for residential rental providers in terms of utility charges, and those are the pumping out and cleaning of sewage and septic tanks, cartage costs for refilling fire safety water tanks, cartage charges for drinking water. So if you've got tank water, you're responsible for the cartage charges, but not the cost of the water. And the costs of installation of the NBN. So there's a $300 connection fee on most NBN installations for the initial installation only. So it's a one-off. You'll need to pay that for the first tenant that has NBN, but then after that, that shouldn't be charged again. Mentioned prohibited terms before with the standard contracts. So terms that are prohibited are terms requiring the renter to take out insurance. So we're talking about the renter's contents insurance. That's not overly important for you guys to be concerned about. Terms exempting the residential rental provider from liability of an act of the provider or the agent. So if in the property, as an example, an expensive vase or something gets broken during a routine inspection, we can't have a clause in there that says the agent or the provider aren't responsible for damage to that property. Terms requiring the renter to pay penalties or liquidated damages and compensation. We can't prescribe that in the contract. Our job is to take them to VCAT if there's an issue. VCAT makes the decision as to what the compensation is going to be. Terms requiring professional cleaning. I'm going to come back and talk about cleaning later. You'll notice there's a bit there that says if not contained in the standard form. They are contained in the standard form, so we've got that term in there. And I'm going to come back to it later because that is a really good win for landlords and agents. Terms providing for discounts, rebates or other benefits to be paid to a renter who does not contravene the rental agreement. That basically means we can't bribe them to do the right thing. We can't say, if you do the right thing, we're going to give you $100 at the end of the month. We expect them to do the right thing. If they don't do the right thing, there are consequences. But there's no, you can't put a term in that says you're going to bribe them to do the right thing. There's a requirement to give all named renters on a contract access to the property. So if you've got a family that moves in, 2 adults and 4 kids, the 2 adults will be named on the lease. You need to give 2 sets of keys that allow access to the property to those renters. You don't need to give a full set of house keys. You don't need to give letterbox keys, for example. You need 1 letterbox key, but you need to give all named renters keys that will allow them access to the property. If the renter requests any additional keys above and beyond that, they can pay for them. Back to professional cleaning. I mentioned it before. I said this is a win for us, and if handled correctly, it is a really good win. Again, listen to the team as to what needs to be done to get this done right, because if this is handled correctly, we're not going to have problems with properties being handed back in not good condition or dirty or unclean. So if you undertake professional cleaning prior to a tenant moving into the property, and you provide the receipt to the tenant can be expected or is expected to have the property professionally cleaned when they vacate the property. So maybe the first time round you guys will have to pay for it, but from then on, at the end of every tenancy, the outgoing tenant will pay for it. They'll provide a receipt to the property manager, and then the next tenant will have to also have it professionally cleaned. Might be a one-off cost for you guys, but it will go on forever, that the property will keep getting professionally cleaned. It is a really good win for us as agents and you as landlords.
The problem we had before was there was this thing called reasonably clean. My level of reasonably clean will be different to David's, different to tenant A, different to different B, and the same landlord. So it's actually a solid thing. We've just got to start this process, which is going to be a bit grey at times, but once from the 29th of March moving forward, let's just start making sure, because has anyone had any issues before with their tenants and unclean when they've left? No? Yes? Maybe a few. Yeah. So this will stop that. So we're very excited about this, if anything else.
So yeah, it's been a good win to have this one come through for us. Another area of concern for everyone has been hearing that renters are going to be able to make modifications to the property. It's again not as bad as it sounds. There's modifications without consent. I'm going to run through these ones first, and these ones aren't too concerning at all. They're common sense. They're nothing to get overly stressed about. So renters can install picture hooks or screws for wall mount shelves, brackets on surfaces other than exposed brick or concrete. So that's your plaster walls and that type of thing. They're allowed to put up some picture hooks if they use the right picture hooks. I'm not too concerned about it. You may have a preference for them using either a nailing hook or an adhesive hook. Whatever your preference is, make sure your property manager is aware so as they can kind of guide tenants in that direction. Wall anchoring devices to secure furniture on surfaces other than exposed brick or concrete. LED light globes that do not require new light fittings. That's no big deal, that's just a globe. They're just a more expensive globe, so yeah, not concerned about that at all. Water efficient shower head as long as the original is retained. Blind and cord anchors. Security lights and alarm systems and security cameras that do not impact the privacy of neighbours. So your tenant can't be putting up a security camera that looks at the neighbour's front door, for example. As long as they're not hardwired and they're easily removable. Hardware mounted child safety gates on walls other than exposed brick or concrete. Non-permanent window film for insulation. It's like the contact that you used to put on school books. So it's removable. Wireless doorbell. Replacement of curtains as long as the original curtains are retained. Adhesive child safety locks on drawers and doors. Pressure mounted child safety gates and a lock on a letterbox, which again is not a big deal. I'm not too concerned about any of those. The biggest thing that's going to cause any concern might be a couple of picture hook holes in the wall. Other than that, there's nothing to be too concerned about at all with that lot. There's modifications that tenants can make, but they must seek consent. Your consent cannot be unreasonably withheld, but it can come with conditions. So I'll quickly run through this list that we've got up there, and then I'm going to talk a bit about a couple of the points on there. So we've got the first point's the same as the first 2 points on the previous page, except it can be done on exposed brick or concrete walls. Draft proofing in homes without open fluid gas heating. Installation by a qualified person of security system that does not impact on neighbours. installation of fly screens on doors and windows, installation of a vegetable or herb garden, installation of a secure letterbox, painting of the premises, modifications to secure external gates, and modifications which contribute to the conservation of a registered place. Now I'm going to focus, and I'm going to use painting of the premises as an example, because that's probably been the one that's caused the most concern. As part of the approval process, and remember, you cannot unreasonably withhold consent, but as part of the approval process, you have the right to dictate that if the renter wants to paint the property, they must use a qualified tradesperson to do that work. Another aspect of it is that they are required at the end of the tenancy to return the property to pre-modification condition. So if they go off and have the walls painted black, they are required to return it to the colours that they previously were prior to them changing the paint colours. And you can, as part of the approval process, demand an extra bond or increase in the bond that is proportionate to the cost of restoring the property to the pre-modification condition. So again, if we use painting as an example, if a tenant wants to paint the whole home, that's probably going to cost a minimum of $3,000 to get a professional tradesperson to do it. Then you're going to ask them for a $3,000 bond. I reckon there's probably not going to be too many tenants that go ahead and end up painting the home. And if they do it without consent, then there'll be consequences as well. This is just about the renter has the obligation to return the property to pre-modification condition, and you can take that extra bond. So we've just gone over that. Rent increases. Leases that were entered into after 19th of June 2019 can have their rent increased once every 12 months. It used to be once every 6 months. Many agents that I've spoken to over the years only ever used to review the rent once every 12 months anyway. So I don't know what the guys here did, but for many agents, nothing's going to change. Compensation for sales inspections. Again, this has provided some clarity and will stop arguments. You will be required, if you put the property up for sale, to provide the renter with compensation of either $30 per inspection or half the daily rent, whichever is greater. With the average rents that Elise mentioned before, which I think she said was $360 a week, you'll probably find most of them are at the $30 level. Previously, there was no laws in relation to this, and tenants could hold us to ransom and say, and pretty much say, if we don't get something, we're not going to be cooperative. We're not going to present the house neat and tidy or anything like that. And they barter for more compensation in a lot of cases. Here they can't do that. We can turn around to them and say, it's legislation, this is all you're getting. So again, it's provided some clarity, and overall, the cost incurred is not is minimal compared to the total transaction of selling a home. There's some minimum standards that you need to be thinking about. The first minimum standard is that all external doors able to be secured by a deadlock must have a functioning deadlock. It can be a deadlock or deadbolt or dead latch, as long as it's a barrel, a solid barrel lock, not the, what would we call them, the other type? You made fun of me yesterday when you called it something. There are exceptions, so if it's a screen door, it doesn't need a deadlock. If a law requires a different lock to be put on the door, if it's an external door that can't be accessed due to a security barrier, then you don't need to have a functioning deadlock on them.
This deadlocks business has caused a lot of headaches with some agents and all the rest of it, because there's people are not too sure what a deadlock actually is. I've got a determination of what it is. Other agents will have. I have severe concerns about an elderly person or someone with special needs, and we go and put a deadlock on the house, and it's a safety issue. What I believe will happen, what David and I believe happen, as these roll out, whilst it's changed in Parliament, I don't know if this is going to be in concrete moving forward until such time something sadly does happen. So I wouldn't rush out too quickly, because some of these are grey, and I think as we move forward in the next few months, things will settle down and they'll determine saying, oh, it's this sort of deadlock. What they're trying to get around with this legislation is that, and I'm sure there's no one in the room here, but there's some investment owners who have got dodgy locks in. Another thing we'll talk about, David will talk about in a minute, is the dowel in the windows. You can't put dowel in the windows anymore. You've actually got to have a lock on the windows. So don't stress too much about these locks. We're still waiting for a lot of answers. David and I have been having playing pinball with Consumer Affairs Victoria about, well, what's a lock? Tell us what's a lock so we can tell our landlords. And they don't even know yet. So just don't panic too much about this sort of stuff. As we go forward, we'll keep in touch with Wellington and let you know what's going on. So don't panic, it's fine. One day at a time.
You need to provide a general rubbish bin and a recycling bin. You do not need to provide a green waste bin. And the bins must either be council provided bin or a vermin-proof bin, which the local council will collect. Now, I know in some rural areas, I don't know if any of you guys have got properties in areas where this is the case, but some rural areas don't have a council bin collection or council provided bins. And again, Consumer Affairs is at a loss to tell us what's expected in those areas at this stage. Toilets must be in working order and connected to appropriate disposal systems, so sewer or septic. They must be in a room designed to be a toilet room or in a separate structure. So if you've got an older home which has got an outdoor toilet, that is still okay. Bathrooms must be connected to a reasonable supply of hot and cold water, must contain a wash basin and either a shower or a bath. They don't need to have both, they can have one or the other. If it's a shower, the shower head must be of a 3-star rating, unless it's not effective to have a 3-star rated shower head, in which case you can have a 1 or 2-star rated shower head. So if the water pressure is really low for any reason, you don't need to have the 3-star rating. Kitchen's got to have a dedicated area intended for food preparation and cooking, and have a sink connected to a reasonable supply of both hot and cold water. There must be a stove top with a minimum of 2 burners or elements, and if there is an oven, it must be in good working order, but there is no requirement for there to be an oven. The minimum cooking requirement is the 2 burner stove top. If you have a laundry facility, it must be connected to hot and cold water. The property must be structurally sound and weatherproof. It must be free of mould and damp caused by the building structure. And from the 29th of March 2022, so in a year's time, or just under a year's time now, each room is likely to be used as a living area, so lounge rooms, dining rooms, that type of thing, or a bedroom is to be fitted with an operable curtain or blind. From the 29th of March 2023, all power outlets and lights must be connected to a switchboard type circuit breaker and a switchboard type current device. So if your switchboard is one of the ones that takes the old ceramic type fuses, it's going to need to be updated. All external windows which are capable of opening must have a functioning latch to secure it from external entry. The Act actually says a functioning lock. We have what we refer to often as the Untitled Residential Tenancies Act, which is a copy of the Act which contains commentary from VCAT members. You've always had to have locks on your windows, but that commentary talks about a latch that secures the window from inside is adequate. So most properties are going to have a latch that secures it from inside. You don't need a key operated lock Nothing, there has been nowhere where that definition has been changed. All interior rooms, corridors, hallways are to have access to appropriate level of natural or artificial light, and each habitable room must have access to natural light during daylight hours. If it's a habitable room that doesn't have external windows, it can borrow, for want of a better term, light from another room. And it's got to have artificial light for the non-daylight hours. All rooms basically in the house have to have ventilation required, which is appropriate by the building council or commission performance standards. As far as heating goes, from the 29th of March this year, all properties must have a fixed heater in good working condition in the main living area. That includes ducted heating because that provides vents into the main living area. It doesn't need to be energy efficient if it was already there before the 29th of March. If you have to replace one after the 29th of March, it must be replaced with an energy efficient heater. And from the 29th of March 2023, any non-energy efficient heater must have been upgraded to an energy efficient heater by that point in time. These minimum standard provisions, unless they're ones that have got a specific date allocated to them, do not apply to existing tenancies, only to new tenancies. If a property doesn't meet the minimum standards at the start of the tenancy, the renter can serve you notice to have it treated as an urgent repair, which means it needs to be done. They say immediately in the Act. Immediately does come with a bit of leeway because you may need to organise ordering of parts or something along those lines. There are fines imposed in the most extreme of circumstances if it doesn't meet the minimum standards. This is where I say it's really important to listen to the guys that are guiding you and looking after your property, because they know what needs to be done, and their job will be to ensure you guys aren't going to get hit with any of these fines. So if they tell you something needs to be done, listen to them. There's some safety compliance requirements that we have to look at now as well. Every 2 years you need to have gas and electrical safety checks on the property. They come under the control of an Australian standard that they need to be checked to. You need to have them done by a licensed person, so a licensed electrician or gas fitter, depending on whether it's gas or electrical. And you must provide to the renter the date of the last electrical check and gas check in writing if they ask. Smoke alarms need to be checked and serviced in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions at least once every 12 months. You've got to ensure the batteries are replaced as required. The RRP must provide the renter with details on how each alarm operates, how to test each alarm, and the renter's obligation to not tamper with and to report it if not working. Again, listen to the guys at Wellington Real Estate. They'll have a system in place, or they'll have something that ensures these are done to the right way. Swimming pools. I'm going to ask you guys a question now. If anyone that's got a swimming pool, can you put your hand up? Because I didn't check with the guys before if anyone did have a pool. No pools? If you did have a pool, you've got to have a barrier, which is working. Terminating a rental agreement, there's a 120-day no reason notice to vacate that we used to have. That is no longer available. And there is an end of lease notice to vacate, which we used to be able to serve at the end of a fixed term lease, any fixed term lease. We can now only serve it at the end of the first fixed term of a tenancy. It's going to be really important for you guys again to listen to your property managers and their advice as to whether you should renew a lease or whether you should issue a notice to vacate to those tenants that are causing issues and problems. Rent arrears has changed slightly. It's not a great change, but it's not a disaster either. The basic requirements for us to issue a notice to vacate haven't changed. They require a renter to be more than 14 days in arrears, and we must give them 14 days to vacate the property. If they make payment before the termination date on that notice to vacate, on 4 occasions within a 12-month period, then the notice to vacate becomes null and void. If they don't make payment, we can take them to VCAT and seek a possession order, but VCAT must consider the possibility that the renter can afford a payment plan. On the 5th occasion that they are in this position in a 12-month period, it doesn't matter if they make payment. You can go to VCAT straight away or after the termination of the termination notice, and VCAT can only consider and must issue a possession order. So with this one, we've got a cut-off, we've got an end position, it's the 5th notice. Previously there wasn't an end position, but here it goes, the 5th notice must be a possession order. Urgent repairs. Tenants used to be able to arrange urgent repairs up to $1,800 and expect reimbursement. That amount's now increased to $2,500. The renter must make all effort to contact your property manager and have them organise the repairs. But if they don't act in a pretty quick fashion, the renter can go and get the repairs done and get the reimbursement. So if they ring you and say we need to get something done, it's classed as an urgent repair, you need to be prepared to act pretty quickly on it. Urgent repairs include a cooling device if one is supplied. There is no need to have a cooling device in the property. Any of the minimum standards will be classed as urgent repairs. Any safety related devices, and I'll go through what some of those might be on the next page, and any fault that makes the premises unsafe or insecure, including a pest infestation. Now when we talk about pest infestations, we're not just talking about 3 or 4 cockroaches. We're talking about a situation where you pretty much can't see the floor because of whatever the pest is. So don't get too stressed that tenants are going to ring up and ask about you paying for pest control if there's 3 or 4 cockroaches. That's not your responsibility. Non-urgent repairs are the same as previously. They haven't changed at all. There's going to be a rental non-compliance register, and again it's really important to listen to your property managers here because they'll tell you what you need to do and guide you so to ensure you don't get put onto this register. If the tribunal makes an order against a landlord, where the landlord must remedy a breach, pay compensation or refrain from committing a breach, that order must be listed on the non-compliance register. That will include the name of the landlord, the address of the premises, the agent's details and the details of the order. It is really, really important that you listen to the people that are trained to deal with this, because if your name or your property keeps appearing on that register, chances are it's going to become much harder to lease out. Again, I don't want you to have any fear about this, because if you listen to your property manager, they'll guide you to ensure that you're not going to have this happen. And most of these laws are designed for bad landlords that do the wrong thing. You guys have come along here tonight, I reckon you're all going to be pretty good landlords, so you're probably not going to be caught up in this, but you need to be aware of it. Exceptions to existing agreements. There's a list of things that don't need to be done for existing agreements, which are disclosure requirements and invalid or prohibited terms because the renters are already in there. Same with the discrimination aspects, although most of the discrimination aspects we had to abide by previously. Rent increases, if leases were entered prior to the 19th of June 2019, you can still do 2 a year. And the requirements of the minimum standards aren't applicable to existing leases unless it's a minimum standard that's got a set date on it. And if you want to find some more information, these are 3 websites that you can look at. There's legislation.vic.gov.au where you can get copies of the Residential Tenancies Act and the regulations. consumer.vic.gov.au, which is Consumer Affairs. They're the body that oversees all of this information. And there's tenantsvic.org.au. That is the Tenants Union of Victoria website. They are extremely well funded and they put out a lot of great information on their website. The tenants are reading it, you should do too. When we're training property managers, I am always pushing property managers to know what's on that site at all times, because that has all the information that you need to know. Guys, that's the end of me talking. I'm going to hand over to Shane. Thank you very much for listening to me. Hope you got a fair bit of information out of that.
Thanks, David. Cheat sheet, please grab one. Elise will put them out. I think Elise wants to come up and say a couple of things. You can leave it. We keep the camera going, Elise. You'll be on it. Thanks so much. I know you've probably got a lot of questions around all that. At the end of the day, it's actually quite black and white. I'm sure Elise and her team, me and David, we don't necessarily agree with some of these changes, and some seem a bit odd. I guess I'm trying to be diplomatic, but it will all settle down, and give Elise a call, and if she's stuck, she'll call us.
Sure. I just actually wanted to introduce the team while we've got some clients here. So some of you may have met or may not have. So we've got Charlie, Nat, Dale, Cindy, Kayla and Lisa, Julian, Kevin, Tony. So feel free to have a chat afterwards and ask questions if you would like to. But we really thank you for coming along, and hopefully, yeah, you can get a little bit out of this.
Hang around, there's more food. I'll be down there.
Do you want to ask? Does anyone want to ask questions in the crowd? Yeah, go, David, quick, help.
No, Shane, this is where you stand up.
Thank you very much for this evening, providing this evening. It's been an excellent opportunity to discuss some of this stuff. So thanks to Kev for the invite.
Awesome.
I've taken notes. Is that all right?
Good.
Yep.
Take notes. Great.
Pets. In the past, we've asked for a double bond for pet damage to carpets and scratches on door ups and things. Can we still do that? Or is that negated by the requirement to return it to the original standard that it was in?
You can always ask, but if they say no, there's probably very little you can do, because they would end up in VCAT, and VCAT's going to say you don't need an extra bond, you're allowed to have a pet. It's negated by the requirement for them to return the property to its original condition.
And that's the professional cleaning part comes into it too.
Yep.
So damage on wall arcs, door arcs and things.
Yeah,
scratching away.
That's not covered by professional cleaning, but that would be covered under the terms that they're not permitted to cause damage to the property, and cat scratches and that type of thing would be damage which is in excess of fair wear and tear.
Okay. Keys, are we as landlords entitled to know how many sets of extra keys have been cut? So we know how many are out there in circulation, or do you have to change the locks every time?
Yeah, that's no. You just have to let the agent will know, and can let you know. That's straight.
There's
Yeah.
two extra sets that they've given to their mum or their boyfriend or something.
And with that as well, if any tenant wants to change locks in the future, they're still permitted to change the locks as long as they provide a copy of the keys to us. So if they've got any concerns that there might be keys floating around out there, which a lot of tenants do, they can change it, but they have to give us a copy of those keys.
The amendment came into play due to some agents, some landlords giving one key, one remote to 2 or 3 tenants who are on the lease. So they had to, work out who's going to come home first, or the garage, or whatever. That's how it's come to play.
Yeah. But the flip side is they cut extra keys and you don't know how many are out
Yeah.
there who've got access
There's-
to your property.
There's going to be a case where you can never be sure how many keys are out there, because you're relying on them to be honest with us. Most will return them all because they don't need them, but yeah, there could be some out there still. But the new tenants are concerned about that as well. And from being a property manager, I generally tell tenants if they want to get new keys cut because they're concerned about how many keys are out there, they're more than welcome to do that as long as they give us a copy. And I think most tenants they know that they themselves in the previous tenancy have given keys away, so they understand there could be multiple keys out there.
Changing light globes. We have a property not here, elsewhere, and we've recently done an end of tenancy inspection in the last couple of weeks, and the agent said to us that tenants are not able to, or can't be required to stand on a step or a ladder to change a light globe, and that we have to get a handyman in to change the light globes when they blow.
It's probably a bit of a grey area as to what you can ask them to do. The general rule of thumb is we're not really permitted, or we shouldn't really be asking to do anything where they've got to stand on a ladder, because that comes with some risk.
Just changing the light.
We know.
Yeah,
We
know, we agree.
We agree.
We agree, but most light globes they can change because most, somehow you can get to them and reach them without that. There are some, you get some of the higher ceilings, for example, where it is really difficult to change them. And in those cases, yes, it's probably something that the landlord should be paying for the tradesperson to change them, but the tenant should still be paying for the globes.
I'll give you a flip side of that. Let's assume for a minute the tenant moves out of the house and there's 27 light globes need to be replaced with a 9-foot ceiling, and your agent makes an application to VCAT to get the compensation for the tradesperson who's going there. You won't get $1.
Well, if he's going to change 27, that's fair enough, but you know how they go.
Well,
one goes
two,
this week, and
I
one
was
goes
being-
next 2 weeks later, and one goes 2 weeks
I'm on your
later.
side.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Yeah, just because we're telling you stuff you don't like hearing doesn't mean we disagree. We're just
I can assure you,
we're the
don't
conveyors
understand
of, we're the conveyors of the
We-
news, not the
We have a
makers of
situation
it.
where not always, sometimes, have been diplomatic. We go to VCAT a lot in relation to claims from landlords back to tenants. It doesn't necessarily go our way a lot. Let's just say that, which we don't.
Can I ask something?
Yep.
You keep mentioning VCAT, heaps of times. Like, at the end of the day, can we do some of the work ourselves? Can we go in there and change the light bulb?
There's a requirement in the new Act that you need to use a qualified tradesperson. Now, if it's electrical that requires an electrician by law, you need an electrician to
You don't
do
need
it.
that for light.
If it's a plumbing issue that requires a plumber by law, you need to get a plumber to do it. If it's a handyman type job, handymen don't need to be qualified in any way, shape or form. So you can do it.
That? How do we clarify what's a handyman and what's a tradesman?
What by
What can you
qualification?
tell me now what that is?
Well, a handyman's not going to have, a handyman might not have an electrical qualification.
No, I agree with that.
Yep, so yeah, my opinion, David, correct me if I'm wrong, yourself can go and change the light globes.
Yep.
A handyman can go and change the light globes.
Yep.
If there's a light globe with fitting is incorrect and needs a sparky, then you need to send an electrician.
If you need to touch the wiring in any way, shape or form or expose the wires, you need an electrician.
Yeah,
If it's replacing a standard globe, not a problem.
So the electrician's got to do your smoke alarm.
with that,
Most houses now have got a hardwired
Yep.
smoke alarm.
Correct.
So the smoke alarm's got to be done by an electrician.
Correct.
I don't know what the guys at Wellington, what their thoughts are, but my thoughts are that your smoke alarm should be done by somebody that will provide an invoice for the work done, because you need to be able to provide proof that that work's been done. If you do it yourself, you can't provide proof.
Well, you've just shown the battery. Even if it's hardwired, you can have a battery as well as a backup.
Yeah, but you've also got to test it in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions, which is not just pushing a button. You've got to test that they can detect smoke.
Well,
the only smoke.
But you've got to be able, what I'm saying, I'm not disagreeing with you, I'd love to test them all myself, but what I'm saying is you've got to be able to prove, you've got to have if it goes to VCAT, if there's a problem and there's a fire and the smoke alarm doesn't go off, you need to be able to go to VCAT and provide written, or your property manager needs to be able to provide evidence that it was tested in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. And if you've done that, there's no invoice, there's no paper trail that it's been done.
I could write a letter to the property manager saying all the stuff has been done.
What are your
And
thoughts,
testing.
Shane?
And testing. I mean, I think this can become very onerous, to be quite honest with you. And there is a lot of...
Yeah, I'm not arguing with that. I think it does can too.
Onerous activities that are required on a biannual basis as a result of these changes.
Yep.
Yep.
And at an expense to everybody in this room.
Yep.
Yep.
The thing I didn't hear, I can ask a question about, but I'm not interjecting over everyone else here, is that I haven't heard anything about the bonds and the bond recovery rights of the tenant.
Okay. The bond issues really haven't changed from the point of view of time frames. If a tenant, yes, a tenant can now initiate a claim for a bond. If they initiate that claim, the RTBA must, which is the Rental Bond Authority, must notify the landlord or the agent that that claim has been made. The landlord or agent then has 14 days in which to advise the RTBA that this is going to be contested at VCAT. Under the old laws, although the tenant couldn't initiate the claims, we had 10 business days to make a claim at VCAT. So the time frames aren't changing. What it's designed to do is it's designed to stop agents and landlords that are holding on to bonds for a month or 2 months. It's designed to enforce that rule is followed.
Was the amount of bond being paid changed, percentage in relationship to the rental?
The amount of bond is still 1 month's, equivalent of 1 month's rent. Previously there was a threshold of anything that was above $350 a week. You could ask for a higher bond. That has now changed to $900 a week, but the maximum bond under the threshold remains at 1 month's rent. With the addition that you can you can demand an extra bond for any of those modifications that require consent.
We're more than happy to take back and investigate and let Elise know about these smoke detectors in this grey area, because we're on board with you, and not one of the landlord nights we've done this year that has always come up in question time. Every time. Every time. And we're still waiting for some feedback from Consumer Affairs Victoria on the point. Okay.
I've just got a couple of little ones. Some of them have been answered. So you would just, if you wanted to end a lease after that first year,
Yes.
say you weren't happy or
Yep.
whatever,
Yep.
things deteriorated, maybe they had their, 3 kids move in and, they're trashing the place or whatever, how do you go about that then?
You can't.
You can only, after that, you can only end a lease with a specified reason. So if their rent arrears are past the, they fill that rent arrears, if they're causing malicious damage, if they're threatening or violent behaviour towards landlord, neighbours or the agent. There's a range of reasons that you can ask for vacancy, or if you're going to sell the property, if you're going to move back in yourself or move in as a family member.
If they're misbehaving, let's just say they're misbehaving during that tenancy after that initial 12 months, there's a breach process. We have to breach them for whatever they're not doing right, and there's a process with those breaches. And then once they've breached over a period of time, like 1, 2, 3 breaches of something specific, we can ask for possession, and then we go from there through a VCAT hearing. Not straightforward, not ideal. Fingers crossed everything's going to be okay. Not a fan.
Okay. So that was, one of my other questions was, what's a possession order? I'm assuming now from what you've said that means we repossess the property. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah. A possession order is the agent and the owner is taking back of that property for whatever reason that may be. It might be possession order based on arrears, a possession order based on the house is going to be sold, possession order based on the owner's moving back in.
Yep.
So you get the possession order from VCAT, you've got to go to VCAT to get that order.
And this is only under the assumption that the tenant wants to drag it out, disagree. The majority of times, high percentage of times, it's done between the agent and the tenant and negotiated, and the tenant goes, look, I need another couple of weeks. Can you have one? Yep, that's fine, they go. Most people, it's a bit of a headache at times, but it's a small minority across that they go, they drag it out. I know we hear of bad stories, and you probably all had one, but at the end of the day, they do go. It's just a bit of a process sometimes.
Okay. I just had another question. So you were saying you can increase the bond if they decide to paint the house or get the house painted. But that happens when they ask for to repaint the house. So they've been there for 2 years. They decide they want, a pink bedroom. What then, with that clause of getting someone professional to do it, comes and you have to pay how much is that bond?
Yeah.
What-
So anything that was on that list of modifications that require consent, part of that consent can be to ask or to demand an additional bond or increase in the bond which is proportionate to the cost of restoring the property to the pre-modification condition. So if it's going to cost $3,000 to restore it to the pre-modification condition, that's the bond you ask for.
I think that's all I had. I'm just lucky because I've got a really good landlord. Agent.
Right.
You all
Sorry.
do.
Right. All
Sorry.
good. Yeah.
Yeah.
In relation to the electrical and gas certification every 2 years, that came in on the 29th of March.
29th of March for new leases. It doesn't apply to existing leases, although you do have to have it done in 2023.
Yeah, that's one. The existing ones, we've got basically 2 years and 23 months to get it done.
About 2 years. 2 years
They
to get
moved
it
in on
done,
the
yeah.
26th of March. Beautiful.
Yeah, you've got 2 years basically. But if they moved in on the
30th.
30th of March and you haven't done it, you need to get it done as soon as possible.
The renewal of the lease doesn't affect that? Or does the renewal
The ren-
keep the new?
The renewal of the lease, you may have heard that there was a bit put out on the Consumer Affairs website that a renewal of lease or lease transferring from fixed to periodic meant that these changes kicked in. That is only in relation to fixed term leases over 5 years. Fixed term leases under 5 years, that doesn't apply.
So we've got till the 24th.
March 2023.
23.
Yeah, with the gas and electrical and all that, I rang last week about it. I rang a gas pipe to come and he said he's going to charge $200 to come and test the gas line. No worries. I said, how long are you going to test the pipe? I'll look after it for
It's not.
2 years. He goes, no. So we got a certificate to say he's going to, he's not going to look after that for 2 years, is he? He's not going to give you a certificate saying that's
He'll give you a certificate that says it complies at that point in time. But what you've also got, it's not just the gas line, it's also the gas appliances
Yes,
that need
but as
to
soon
be
as he's
tested.
out the door, that's fine.
As soon as he walks out, if he's given you that certificate, that gives you protection from having to have it done again for 2 years.
Yes, it gives you
But it-
protection, but doesn't say it's good for 2 years.
No.
So where does this come from and why?
Somebody in a government department needs to justify their job, and they've made some laws.
I know, but it's bullshit because we've got to pay $600-700 a year for all this bullshit.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm not arguing with you.
I know you're not, but I'm just saying, as soon as he walks out the door, we're paying for this. As soon as he walks out the door, that's a waste of money.
I spoke to an owner this morning
So
who
what's
owns
the point?
27 rental properties.
Yeah,
He's absolutely gutted and
Oh, I know.
disgusted.
So am I.
And we are too.
so am I, but I
Yeah.
mean,
No, I get it.
so why can't we do something about it? Why can't we, as a landowner, say something about it to the government?
Local member.
Yeah, I'm happy, let's go.
Yep. Go.
Yeah, we do it.
How do you do it?
Just go talk to Gary and say you're
email
not
him.
happy.
Start
Go
letters.
talk to
Start
Gary.
Am I going to get back up here or not?
Yeah, absolutely. You're not alone. You're not alone. I can get you, well, assuming the other 500 landlord that I've spoken to in the last 2 months, they're on the same page.
If we're paying this money, we want it for 2 years, not the 2 minutes that he's there. do it.
Agreed. Yep. I'm all for you. I'll back you up.
Yeah, we should do it.
This electrical testing is a crock of, because
Yep.
it's like a tag and test. Bloke comes along, he checks it, puts it away.
Yep.
At that particular moment, it's safe. 2 days, 3 days, 2 months down the track. It's
It
not
can
safe.
blow up.
That's what I'm saying.
And what does they test? I mean, the most dangerous thing of electrical stuff is rodent exposure, and that's inside the walls. You can't check that. The biggest cause of house fires is candles, smoking, kitchen. It's negligence, and yet us poor landlords have got to.
Agree. Agree. I'm happy to go into bat for you. I'm happy to ring Consumer Affairs. I'm happy to ring whoever I need to ring to put your concerns in front.
This is a big government policy, is it? Not
Yes.
federal.
Victorian state
And
government.
how does that compare to New South and South Australia?
It's a little bit different. Queensland's very similar to us. New South Wales is not. They're all different.
Last question.
That's okay. You can have 10 questions. We don't mind. We stay here till midnight, don't you?
With regards to the urgent repairs.
Yes.
Fair enough, get them done.
Yep.
Does that then negate your landlord's insurance, who might then go and say, you didn't get it assessed by our assessor or our preferred repairer?
I'd suggest you ring the insurance company. Sorry. Each insurance company's probably going to be
I
slightly
can
different.
answer that one. So I just had a similar one with our property. We were with RACV, so they said, get things done, get your property manager to get on the receipts, send the receipts through to us. Our assessor will assess it on that, because you got to, they look at it from your point of view that our property was abandoned, there was damage done by the person who abandoned it, and the insurance agent said, well, you've got to get your property back to a standard that you can get people renting. We don't want to delay that. Get it fixed, send us the bill. And basically, within a few weeks, they paid it. So,
So they did the right thing, I think.
Yeah, I'd imagine they would. Did you have a question, sir?
Yes. So it mentioned that the bond was $1,000, and when the tenant vacates, and you want to bring it back to where it was when they first went in there, who pays for bringing it back to that stage?
You can take a matter like that to VCAT, and VCAT will make a determination as to whether the tenant's responsible for paying for it, and they will provide an order for compensation, in which case you have various methods to chase the tenant for that compensation. But then you can also, if you've got landlord's insurance, you can pass that order on to your landlord's insurer as well, and in many circumstances they'll pay for it and they'll chase the tenant.
I thought it automatically came out of the bond.
That comes out to the bond up to the
Up to
bond
that
limit.
point.
I mean, once the bond limit, you've got to go to, if the tenant doesn't agree to release the bond, you've got to go to VCAT to get the bond. And then if there's anything in excess of the bond amount, VCAT will then also have to determine whether it is a tenant responsibility or not. If they determine it's a tenant responsibility, then they'll provide an order for compensation. So say it's $2,000, you've got $1,000 bond, and then the tenant will be responsible for another $1,000. There's methods you can go about chasing the tenant for that, or the easiest way is to make a claim through your landlord's insurance, and in most cases they'll look after it, and then they chase the tenant.
One more question?
On the subject of professional cleaning,
Yep.
it looks good and smells good on the day. 3 days later, the smell comes back.
Oh, I don't know.
I've had it happen on a
I
couple of
have an
things.
answer for you, because it happens.
Yeah, a lot.
Because the urine gets in.
That's get in. And then you get a clean carpet, you can't see where it is.
I know.
Gets in the walls too.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
plasterboard and everything.
I insure yourself as much as you can.
They won't insure against it.
Yeah. There's just, as I said, you just got to put your best foot forward. And,
Yeah, they won't insure, any pet damage they won't insure.
yeah. Even on landlord's insurance.
And landlord's insurance or anything. The only insurance that they will do is vermin damage,
Okay.
which is rats and mice infestation.
See, what we've found over the years, there's pets and pets, and then there's tenants and tenants. So forth. So
Some tenants are worse than pets.
Going back to pets.
That's true.
What is the go with pets? You've got dog and cat in a normal house.
Yep.
There's the cat, animal.
Yep.
A little bit of land. I want to throw a goat, sheep, something like that.
Your decision.
What's the go?
Well,
Is that the landlord's decision?
Well, That's right.
pigs and elephants.
But then, the tenants will ring Elise and the girls, and I'll ring you and say, listen, this guy wants 4 goats and 2 bulls and a chicken. You can say no. But whether they go and do it after the fact is a different story, and then there's a process for that.
When it comes to the button tax, what's the good?
Yeah.
You go to VCAT, like you mentioned VCAT, like.
We don't like VCAT.
VCAT's shit.
It is shit. It is shit, but that's
Yeah.
our road we need to take as process under legislation.
Our general advice to most property managers we deal with is avoid VCAT at all costs because you don't know how they're going to decide.
Yeah, no, we don't
It's a
want to
matter
go.
of negotiating. So
VCAT's safe, they're not sure.
if you've got good property managers, which you all have, everyone in this room has, they'll be able to negotiate and work through that. And
Just to
hopefully
clarify,
get
we
it
speak about VCAT because that's the road we have to take our legislation. We hate it. I've got better things to do, worry my bloody time of driving and getting on the phone to a VCAT member to have an outcome that's crap. Not all the time though, there is wins. Let's get something neat. And thanks everyone for coming.